My name is Emily Ambrose. My pronouns are she and hers. I work in training and talent development here in the Laurie Student Center as well as assessment. And it is my honor to get off the stage as quickly as possible. So I introduce Chelsea Klein, who's here with us from Human Development and Family Studies and is going to share training specifically for us around trauma-informed supervision. So please help me welcome Chelsea.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you all so much for having me here. Also, I'm short, so hopefully that works. It's so great to be here with you all. I'm Chelsea Klein. I'm a senior clinician and marriage and family therapist and grant coordinator over at CTRAC, we're CSU's Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center. It's over in the Gifford building through HDFS. I do a lot of trauma work with kids and adults and families. I do a lot of trainings like this, teaching community members and people at CSU about trauma-informed care, and lots of other things in my job. I wear a lot of hats. But I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. And when Emily sent the principles of community and some of the slides around the focus for SHAPE, it just really aligns perfectly with trauma-informed care. Particularly here, the definitions of the 3 areas of student success. And so really looking at those sense of belonging, well-being, and development. We'll get into the specifics of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed supervision today, but really does align nicely with, I think, what you all are learning throughout the training series these couple of days. So thank you again for your attention. I'm pretty casual, so I know we only have an hour, and I think I'm going to use this so I don't have to be, does that work? Okay. So short over there. And so ask questions, raise your hands. We'll have some little bit of time to share with your group and share out with the larger group as well. But I'll have my email at the end, so if after this you have any further questions or want to touch base at all, I love connecting with the CSU community. And so, yes, feel free to contact me if you have any questions after this. All right, so when you think about the jobs that you have had in the past, and you think about a job that you've really loved, and maybe a job that you have really not loved, how much were those feelings towards that job connected to your relationship with your supervisor, and how much were your feelings connected to the work environment or culture? I'm curious if anyone wants to be brave and share either a great one or a not so great one. Yeah, in the back. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Hayden. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you had the ghost supervisor. Yeah, I've known one of those in the past as well. Yeah, where they're somewhere else, you can't find them. You're really on your own. Yeah, thank you. And it adds to the stress for sure. Others. Yeah, I'm back. Mm-hmm. Yep. And what were some of the things, can I ask, the differences between the 2 supervisors? Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 What about the new soup? What was the good stuff? Okay, that's great. The bar is low, but we'll take it. Yeah, so yep, exactly. Yep. Those clear expectations around what you're doing, not overworking, especially not for extra pay. I'm guessing there was no compensation for the extra work, right? Yeah. Yeah. Any others want to share? One more? That's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm, yeah. The contagion, especially from the leader, that is really hard, right? Because I think that's true for so many places, especially when the leader is in that mode, and then it impacts the whole staff, right? And it can be hard to get out of that funk, right, when we have that contagion. Awesome. Yeah. So the point is the supervisory relationship we know is going to make or break a professional experience, going to make or break the sustainability of a job, the feel when you're at work, the stress levels that we have. And we know with trauma-informed care, honestly, when we are impacted by trauma throughout our lives, the best way for us to heal is through supported, safe relationships. And so when a supervisor can be that person, can be a support, can be a trustworthy leader, you're really doing a lot, even in just that relationship, to mitigate stress and help people honestly heal in good ways. Okay, so a little bit of background on stress, because when we're talking about trauma, and I think a lot of people, some people say, oh, I don't have trauma. I don't have trauma, or my trauma is not like other people's trauma. But when we're talking about trauma, we're really talking about toxic stress. And not all stress is traumatic stress, right? We need a little bit of that positive stress, like when you're getting ready for an exam or a presentation, right? You might get a little bit of that stress that gets you going, that gets you ready, prepared for what you need to do. That positive stress can really build our resilience. We need doses of stress in our lives to learn how to adapt, to learn how to deal with that. If we never had any stress in our lives, it would be a really big deal when even something small happens, right? So the positive stress is good for us. Moderate or tolerable stress, maybe something more serious is going on. But the key here is that we have a buffer with the support we have in place, with our skills, with our relationships. So maybe someone has a trauma of a loved one passing away, and so that's a serious trauma. But they also have a community of people who are behind them. Maybe they have paid time off to attend to that. They have loving family and friends who are going to support them through the grief process, right? So that would be more of that tolerable. What happens when we dip into that toxic is that's really that prolonged activation of our stress response system. So our stress response system, when that's online, and it's a good system to have, it keeps us alive, it keeps us going, it keeps us adapting to our environment. But when we're in that toxic stress state for too long, particularly for some people, years, that they can be in this toxic stress state, it really wears and tears on our physiological health, our mental health, our physical health in a lot of different ways. And we see that shows up in many aspects of our lives, including in the workplace. And workplace for some people can be where a lot of the toxic stress is coming from. And so when we think, again, another way to think about toxic stress or trauma, I like this definition because it doesn't talk about specific events. It just talks about how trauma can be anything that is too much, too fast. So too much toxic stress, too fast. It can be not too little for too long. So not having your needs met, not having the support you needed for too long, not having breaks for too long. And then too much for too long. So just too much of moderate or toxic stress for just a very long period of time. So we're going to have these impacts, poor health outcomes, poor mental health outcomes when we're dealing with toxic stress. All right, so these next two slides come from the Community Resiliency Model from the Trauma Resource Institute. They have some great resources there. But they talk about our resilient zone or our okay zone. So when we are in this state, we feel alert, prepared. We feel okay. We feel like life is manageable. We might have stressors. This isn't necessarily the happy zone, right? We can feel all kinds of emotions, sadness, anger, frustration, to even stress when we're in this resilient or okay zone. But what the key is when we're in this resilient zone, we are able to manage the stressors that are coming up for us. So you can see some of the stressors, it goes up. Maybe I woke up late that morning, and so my stress kind of ticks up a little bit. But then my best friend brings me coffee. And so my stress kind of goes down a little bit. And then I get triggered by something that happens at work. But through all of that, I'm still able to, for the most part, like I can name what's going on. I can move forward. I can present myself professionally. I can manage and move forward. So when we're in our resilient zone, we're able to present our best selves and manage the stress that comes into our lives. So what happens with toxic stress, so we got our resilient zone, and then we have a trauma happen, a stressful event, or toxic stress occurs. And that is going to bump us out of our okay zone. So we have a high zone above there, that is where we're going to feel, it's kind of that fight or flight response. We're going to feel more anxious, maybe higher heart rate. Maybe we feel super angry and agitated. We might feel kind of sweaty or hot physiologically. And we might even have outbursts or have our brain doesn't stop. We're just like completely overwhelmed. So that's when we get into that high zone. Anybody here ever feel like they've been in that high zone before? Yep, me too. That's my natural. I go right up to the high zone. But we also have the low zone. And so with the low zone, we're going to feel that's going to be more that freeze state, or even sometimes the fawn state, where we might feel a lot more sad, isolated, even depressed. Maybe we have poor hygiene care during the low zone times, feeling really exhausted, fatigued. Maybe I don't want to be around people. I don't want to do anything. I have no motivation. That's going to be kind of that low zone, or even dissociating a lot more than normal. So not being able to stay present because I'm thinking about the past, or I'm kind of numb almost, especially people working with other people and working with people who are very stressed. That can have an impact on us as well. So anyone here been in that low zone before? Yep, right. We're all human beings, right? This is biology, not weakness. This is a part of how our brains and bodies work to build resilience, to survive, to adapt, right? And so what I tell people is this is the human body adapting to its environment. This is a normal response to an abnormal stressor, right? And the idea, again, is that maybe we spike up or we spike down, but we want to be able to get back into that resilient zone, that okay zone, in a fair amount of time, using our supports, maybe coping skills, relationships we have. But what happens with toxic stress is that we get stuck in that high zone, or we get stuck in that low zone. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They beat me to it. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, I mean, they're both states of dysregulation. I think especially the more trauma background you have, or toxic stress background, community trauma that you have, the more that is true for people. I see a lot of people that I work with, both clinically and just with students and staff that I work with, who have kind of a shrunken okay zone because of different things. Maybe they don't have the skills or different impacts, and so their okay zone is already kind of small. And then what happens is they'll spike up, they'll spike down. What kind of diagnoses do you think people like that get? Bipolar, right? Yeah, ADHD, like all these different things. And I'm not saying that is a real diagnosis. And when you don't understand how the stress response system works, how trauma works, you're missing a big piece of this. You're not getting the whole story. And so just to better understand, again, this is biology, not weakness. This is a normal reaction to abnormal experiences or environments. And the best thing that we can do as supervisors for ourselves and for our staff is figuring out ways what are the things we can do in the environment or our interactions to help kind of widen that okay zone for the people that I'm working with, or even notice when myself or someone else is maybe spiked up or spiked down, or some sort of combination between them. I think there's a lot of people that get stuck on that high and then just crash, because that's exhausting, right? Your nervous system is like overdoing it, overworked. So great question. Any other chat questions or questions from you all? All right, keep going. Okay, so who here has heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? Maybe some people. Okay, yeah. I won't get into the whole big spiel of it, but there was a study done by Kaiser Permanente in the 90s. It was the first study. There's been many, many replications of this studies through the years, but we are looking at, basically that study found that adverse childhood experiences, so trauma that has occurred before the age of 18, that could include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It could also include a parent with mental illness, a family member who is imprisoned. So these kind of individual or family experiences at the top of the tree, the studies show that not only is that going to impact our mental health, but the adverse childhood experiences impact our physical health. And you might think, well, if someone maybe had a lot of trauma, maybe they are more prone to risk behaviors, right? Like using substances or smoking or things that could lead to further health concerns. But what the study found is even when we control for risk behaviors like that, just the trauma, just the stress, the toxic stress alone is what is causing some of the physical and mental health issues that we see. And so the other piece, what I love about this slide and this visual, is that it's not just about the individual and family risk factors or experiences. It's also about what's going on in the community. Has this person or family been exposed to violence in the community, to racism, to poverty, to a lack of access to care and wellness? Those pieces matter. Discrimination, right? And on a daily basis, dealing with microaggressions, and especially in the workplace, that's going to have this impact on us. And so again, it's not just the individual pieces, but the community environmental pieces that are going to have this lasting impact on our stress systems. All right. Anyone heard of burnout? Are you? Amazing. Hopefully this will connect then, give you a little primer. So we know that the stress, and particularly when it turns into toxic stress, can lead to overwhelm when our emotions are at full speed. Anything, like that feeling where anything can just make you burst into tears. I know for me, it's like when it's the end of the very long day and I'm finally like ordering my takeout and they messed up my order and I burst into tears. It's not about the takeout. It's because it's maybe a little bit about the takeout, but I'm in overwhelm, and pretty much anything little stressor is going to make me just lose it because I am outside of that resilient zone. When we've been in overwhelm for too long, that's where we start to creep into burnout. The World Health Organization actually defined burnout as a syndrome resulting from workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And they actually decided, I think it was 2019, that they said this is a workplace hazard. This is a real condition, recognizing that burnout exists. And it was right before 2020, when we all really found out, I think, what that feels and looks like if you hadn't before. So 3 dimensions of burnout is feeling of energy depletion, just that exhaustion, not even just physical, but emotional exhausted. You're so tired. Your ancestors were tired. You're so tired. Like, you can really feel it. That's how that exhaustion can feel. Increased mental distance. We don't want to show up to our jobs. We have a lot of negative thoughts about our jobs or the people that we're working with. A lot of cynicism, lack of hope, right? And so really feeling like not only do we not want to be there, but also when we feel like we're not doing a good job, right? When I'm in that space and that overwhelmed burnout, I don't feel like I'm doing a good job. I don't feel present with my clients. I don't feel present with my staff. I don't feel good at my job, and that doesn't feel good either. So those are some of the signs of burnout. We also sometimes talk about, especially in my field, in human development and working with in the therapy realm, that we talk a lot about compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, right? So a lot of very similar terms there. Some of the signs that we see of burnout for individuals, that we can see this in a lot of different areas. So we've got the cognitive impacts, where we might, again, feel really pessimistic. We might have intrusive negative thoughts, maybe some black and white or rigid thinking patterns. One of the things that happens in the cognitive realm with burnout and toxic stress, we actually lose our ability to think creatively and problem solve. I don't know if you've ever felt that, if you've been in toxic stress or burnout, but just all creativity goes out the window. I feel very personally like more in that negative headspace. We also might, that hypervigilance, we're really aware of the negative. Our brains are primed to look for the negative in the world. It's what keeps us safe. And so that hypervigilance is like really recognizing and seeing that negative, seeing trauma everywhere you turn. We stop monitoring ourselves and doing ethical practice in that cognitive zone. The social piece, I might be someone who is going to pull back from my people and isolate when I'm in burnout. There might be starting to get cliques at work, right? Little cliques and different groups, less collaboration with others. Emotional, feeling hopeless or helpless, so many emotions that can go with that burnout, and lack of emotions, right? Because the other thing is, I know a lot of people, and I've been there too, where numbing out. And numbing out is really attractive and accessible in our society, right? We have a lot of ways we can numb. And I'm not to shame anyone for numbing, because I don't know a single person who hasn't needed to numb out at some point in some way. But what happens when we numb out the negative is that we also are numbing out the positive. We can't have that negative threat system in our brain. When that's online, positive emotion system goes back. You can't have both of those online at the same time. So what happens here with feeling numb is that you end up feeling numb not just to the pain, but to joy, to all of the emotions. And that they're going to come out some way, somehow, when we numb. And I think, too, at least for me and my work, it impacts my ability to practice ethically, to be present. Right? Like, I think the biggest thing about trauma-informed supervision is, how do you cultivate your capacity to be present with the people you are with, whether that's staff, customers, clients, students. And so that numbing out, as attractive as it is, can really be detrimental to our wellness. And then the physical, I don't know about y'all, but I very much carry my stress in my shoulders. I have difficulty sleeping. when that happens. So what happens with the toxic stress, it impacts the immune system. We get sick, really sick, when we have too much toxic stress going on. That's our body's way of saying, like, this is too much. If you don't stop, I'll make you stop by getting sick, right? So I'm curious, you might span across all 4 of these. There's another piece too. I need to add another one because I do feel like spiritual is there, whether you're religious or not. I think burnout can really impact our sense of purpose. It can impact what the beliefs we have about ourselves and the world, right? So there's that aspect as well. Think about for yourself. You might be someone who has all of these, but I'm curious, really think about the one that for you, when this happens, when these impacts start showing up, that is my red flag that I am entering burnout zone. So think about for yourself, which one would you say is like, that's my red flag, I'm approaching burnout. Maybe it's the, with the social, like, I can't remember that. Yeah, avoidance of clients. I know it's bad when I'm showing up to work hoping my clients no-show. Like, that's a real thing, and that also it makes me feel bad, but also it's like I'm in burnout because I'm hoping my client doesn't even show up today. So for you all, if you would be so brave to raise your hand, and for those that on Zoom, you can enter in the chat if you feel comfortable. Who are my cognitive people? That's where it hits. A couple people, yep, for sure. Who are my social people? Yep, absolutely. Emotional? Mm-hmm. And that physical. Yeah, we got a pretty healthy mix in here. I think it can be interesting, too, to be aware of this for sure for ourselves, but also for our team, for our staff. I've done this, and if I had more time, we'd do a little bit more activity with it. But I've actually had teams stand up and go kind of where they feel like this fits for them, and having supervisors and managers and other people understand, I can look at that sign or notice this thing in my staff member and understand that they might be approaching burnout. Just gives us a little bit more awareness. I think also gives people a little bit more grace that it's likely not personal, but it's a sign of burnout. And so how can we pay attention to that? Name that, right? Name that can be a work hazard, and that with trauma-informed supervision, we really want to mitigate that. All right, so when we see agency-wide or organizational symptoms of burnout, we often see the high job turnover. People do not stay very long because the environment's not sustainable, the job's not sustainable. People just don't feel motivated, don't feel like they maybe understand the mission anymore. They don't show up for work. They call in sick a lot more. They don't feel satisfied or good at their jobs. And then we can see this organization contagion. So I think it was Haley was saying before about that contagion happening. That spreads so quickly, especially when it's coming from leadership. And then it can feel really hard to get out of it. Have you all ever been in an organization where it felt this way? Like it's not just me, it's the entire agency is burnt out? Yeah. Me too. And what does that do for those of you who've been in that? Like, what's the impact on you when you're in an environment like that 5 days a week or more? Just shout it out. Heavy. Yes. Draining. Why am I here? Exactly. It's like my purpose. Why am I even doing this, right? And feeling like I'm maybe getting paid, but does that feel worth it? So yes, we can really feel the agency-wide systems of burnout. So with trauma-informed supervision, it's just one component of trauma-informed care. It's a system-wide approach to human services that recognizes that trauma is pervasive, and it seeks to mitigate the impact and really to provide a resilient workplace for people to be in. It really, trauma-informed care promotes a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. So we have that trauma-informed care is composed of 6 principles. So this is same as true for trauma-informed supervision. We have safety. And that's going to be true for any type of trauma-informed care that we're doing. Is safety is a priority. We also want to have transparency and trustworthiness with the people that we work with, having peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and an understanding of cultural and historical and gender issues. So we're going to dive into these a little bit more. All right, safety. So for each of these, we've got the pillar, we've got the meaning, and then how do you actually apply that to the supervisor-supervisee relationship? So when we're talking about safety, it's not just physical safety. We're also talking about psychological safety. And being able to show up at work and not just have one person who usually is the leader say, look, it's safe here. We have to understand everyone is coming to work or showing up in the world with their own experiences, with their own histories. Those experiences are going to shape their view of safety, their beliefs about safety. I mean, from a very early age, this is ingrained very foundationally in our brains. Because it's a part of survival, right? So anything to do with safety or being unsafe can really cause big reactions for us. So yes, physical and psychological safety, but it's also about perceived safety. So I might come here and look at this room and say, wow, everyone looks really safe. I feel comfortable and safe here, right? Someone else with a totally different experience might come into the same room and be completely knocked out of their okay zone and feel like this is not safe. And that could be because they're the only person of their race in that room. That could be because there's sexism and they're coming in as a woman. And they're dealing with, or even just microaggressions that we're dealing with. It could even be something really personal I've worked with a client before who the smell of coffee was triggering, because her abuse happened while coffee was brewing. And so, you're not going to know that for every person that you work with. But just having a better idea and understanding that people are coming in with their own past experiences that are shaping their reactions and interactions in the world. And to get curious, I think that's the thing. It's not that you need to figure out every single person's trigger and avoid, don't have any coffee anywhere. But it's to understand that we all have these experiences, and when someone has a big reaction, maybe they're knocked out of their okay zone, to get curious, not furious, as Dan Siegel will say. Can we get curious about that? Is that maybe a trauma response? Is that a stress response for this person? And how can I support? And so the big thing here, too, is that with that perception of safety, are we deferring to supervisees to define safety? It shouldn't just be up to the leaders and the supervisors to define what that is. I think working as a team and really hearing from everyone on the team about what helps them specifically feel safe or supported in the environment, and really checking in on that. We've got that trustworthiness and transparency. Being able to make decisions transparently to ensure, it says survivors, but really anyone feel included in the process. I don't know about you, but if you've worked in a place where it's very hush-hush, especially if you're on, I've been on the lower end of the staffing hierarchy before, and I had no idea why certain decisions were made. There was really big decisions being made, and no one was explaining why or where that came from or how they made that decision. And that was when a lot of gossip and rumors started, right? Because there wasn't transparency. People talk a lot about not only that transparency piece, but how do you build that trustworthiness? And again, people are coming with their own experiences. And so their version of trust or their perception of trust might look really different than yours, right? And so again, this whole theme of just being curious about people's behaviors and understanding that they're going to look different than yours. And so being able to share transparently with staff is a way to really build that trust with them. And as supervisors, and I'm a supervisor as well, I know there's certain things you can't always say to everyone all at the same time, or there's some decisions where you're still working it out, and so you can't really announce it yet.
I get that. But when we're able to share as transparently as we can about why certain decisions are being made, give them a heads up about decisions being made, if it's appropriate, include them in that process. That's when we're going to be able to build that trustworthiness, along with that consistency with communication. Consistency and predictability are what help us feel safe. So the more you can have consistency in the workplace and in your communication, the more you're going to build that trust and safety. Having peer support is really important. So having other individuals, especially with lived experiences of trauma or lived experiences of stress in the workplace, recognizing that we can be resources for each other and support for each other, and really build a culture of understanding and not competition or judgment from others. Being able to make time and space for staff to really, especially staff who might be dealing with traumatic stress or just burnout in general. Do we have things in place for them to connect? Are there things that we have in place that there's time for us to spend together as a group and get that support? Collaboration, mutuality, so being able to not just collaborate across the team, but I think really understanding the power differences. We'll talk a little bit about this in another slide as well, but the power differences between staff and clients and among different staff members, right? And so really understanding what that hierarchy is, how does it move, how does communication and decisions made throughout that hierarchy, and really being able to collaborate with your supervisees on their goals. So obviously they're going to have job expectations that you go over with them and that you make sure they're meeting. But are there other kinds of goals or intentions that they want to have in their work? When we collaborate with our supervisees on creating those goals together, they're going to feel a lot more heard and motivated to reach those goals. Having empowerment, voice, and choice is a very key component for trauma-informed care and trauma-informed supervision. So really being able to just acknowledge that trauma has happened, or acknowledge that this is a stressful situation, acknowledge that people might be creeping up into burnout or in burnout. Dan Siegel says, name it to tame it. We cannot do something with our problems until we name what's going on, or with our emotions till we name it. There is so much power in being able to just help someone name what's going on. You don't always have to fix it. You're not going to be able to always fix it. Sometimes it's enough to just, with a supervisee or with a staff member, be able to name what's going on and share with them that they're not alone and they're not crazy. That other people might be feeling this too, and that this is part of that toxic stress response. Being able to really listen to the feedback from supervisees. So are there multiple feedback loops? What are the ways your supervisees and staff can reach you? What are the ways where they can, either anonymously or not, be able to give feedback about how the workplace is, how supervision is going, what their needs might be, what their goals are? Is that just in a final evaluation at the end of the year? Or are there other types of ways for them to give that feedback? And then what do we do with that feedback? Are we actually implementing that feedback? Are we doing anything with it? Do not ask your supervisees for feedback and do nothing with it. I would rather someone just not even ask for my opinion than to ask me and me put that work into it and then to have nothing come from it or no one follows back up with me, right? So that feedback piece is going to be really important, and really consistent feedback too. Like, how are you consistently getting feedback from your team and your clients? Understanding the cultural, historical, and gender issues. So really recognizing and addressing the biases in our society and in our systems. That's going to show up in every workplace that you're in. So having an awareness about, again, the power differentials, not just within the staff hierarchy, but within our society with different identities. Again, just naming that is true of our society and true for a lot of people, and that there's many people coming into our workplaces, again, who are dealing with microaggressions on a daily basis, who are dealing with poverty, who are dealing with intergenerational trauma that we don't see, right? And so thinking about all the other kinds of potential stressors your staff and even yourself might be facing outside of work, and then to add stress of work on top of that, right? All right, any questions so far? I just talked a lot with those principles. Questions about the principles, comments? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So that's a great question. At C-Track, some of the things we do have an anonymous feedback form. So part of it is nice because hopefully people feel a little bit more, we would always want people to feel comfortable just coming to us, and we know that's not always the case. So being able to provide feedback anonymously can help some people feel a little bit like they can be more honest. And then it's hard because it's like, oh, if we want to, or especially if someone's struggling and they do it anonymously, I'm like, but I don't know which person you are to like reach out directly and kind of help. And so I think it's like having multiple options. Some might be anonymous and some might not. I think for us too, we do a lot of heavy stress trauma work. And so one of the things we have on a weekly basis, it goes out in an email, it's optional, is just a survey around secondary traumatic stress and compassion. And it's optional to take. It is anonymous, but we do know, like, is it a student, a staff member, a graduate student? And so even though, again, we can't respond directly to that person because I don't know who it is, we will name it at our end of week kind of team meeting, hey, it seems like there's a lot of people feeling stressed and burnt out this week. Like, just know we recognize that, we see that. We're going to have extra supervision hours available this week for people if you need it. We're going to give people maybe a little bit more flexibility. We're going to take a look at the caseloads and the workloads and see if there's anything we can kind of take off people's plate or put, right? So I think even when you don't know who it is, being able to kind of then come back to the team and say, hey, we're getting this feedback. Here's what we want to, how we want to react or respond to that. Did that answer the question? Awesome. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about hierarchy, how that can
Mm-hmm.
affect people that you like supervise.
Yeah.
Do you have any strategies to kind of flip that pyramid on its head and really put whoever you're supervising first and making sure that they don't feel that power imbalance?
Yeah, and I think the thing about it is there just is going to be a power imbalance with certain roles. Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a hierarchy, right? Like, even at C-Track, like, we've got our directors, we've got our senior clinicians, our full-time, our students. And so the power difference is based on experience, based on our roles, the kind of work that we do. But I think for us, we really incorporate a lot, and we're not perfect. We've worked a lot to get to this point, but we've put a lot of these principles in place where I think it's okay to have a hierarchy and have some of that difference there, but we don't want to have that power difference when it comes to how we communicate respectfully to each other, right? Like, that rule is going to apply to everyone. Or how we are going to address burnout like a work hazard, right? Or how we're going to be able to cultivate some of that in a new way. So I think it's less about destroying the hierarchy, and it's more about how are you talking about that hierarchy with staff? How are you talking about the differences and how those in power are going to leverage that power? I think that's what real community care is that the people in power recognize that power and they're able to leverage that for the people there, and then empower the staff that might be on that lower end of the hierarchy. If they're wanting to do something new, they have an idea, right? Like, empower them to be part of that table, be part of these conversations when appropriate. So I think it's, you got to come at it in different ways. It's not necessarily that everyone's just going to be completely equal at our workplace, because that might not be the reality. But what are the ways in which we can be equal? What are the ways where we're all going to abide by these values? We're all going to abide by this type of communication. We're going to empower you in these ways, or use our power to kind of pass the mic or leverage that for you. It's for new opportunities. Does that answer that? Okay, cool. Great question. All right, I'm going to keep going. I have a few more. Getting into community care. This is Nikita Valerio. She is a social worker and community advocate. And this, I remember the first time I saw this quote, and it just got me. That shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. Is that resonating with anybody else? Yeah, right? Yeah. That's how I felt as well. Nikita's fabulous. She's got great work out there. And so I just was coming up against experiences over and over where I was in burnout, and I would go up to a supervisor or colleague and just say, like, I am burnout. I'm struggling. And the response I got was, well, are you doing your self-care? What do you want to say to people when you're in that situation? Probably not very nice words in that situation, right? Like, you don't, because one, and actually I need to see, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, I am getting ahead of myself. So one sec. So we know that self-care is not the only part of that puzzle. It cannot be the only part. It's important. Yes, we need self-care. We need to do things for ourselves to help us show up the best that we can, right? Getting good sleep, taking care of our bodies, moving our bodies, connecting with our people. There's so many ways we can do self-care. And that cannot be the only thing, because then you're missing these huge two components, that community care piece, and then the organizational policies and practices, or in other words, trauma-informed supervision, that we need for well-being. It's not just self-care. That can't be the only answer, because when we focus just on self-care, it really, a couple things. One, it tells you that if you want to feel better, you need to do that labor yourself on your own time, outside of the workplace, right? That's typically what's implied with self-care. The other thing is, like, when I go up to my supervisor and say I'm burnt out, and they say, are you doing your self-care? And I say, yeah, I am doing my self-care. I'm doing every single thing on my self-care plan, and it's not working, because that's not the only piece of wellness. I'm not getting these other things. I can't self-care my way, because that's the other thing too. You can't self-care your way out of poverty. You can't self-care your way out of capitalism, right? Like, and so you really got to understand that's not the only part of it. And it's going to make people go crazy if you keep saying, like, you're not doing the self-care, because even when you are, it's not enough. Or you're so burnt out that you don't even have the capacity to do your self-care. I don't have the energy. You're putting the onus on an already burnt out person to do this work when it is only about self-care. So again, I'm not saying forget about self-care. Yeah, we need self-care. And we need to understand it's not just about that. We need the community care piece. We need the organization's policy and practices to support wellness for employees. And I think that's a part of, even when, back to your question about, like, how do you help people feel empowered and, feel like they have voice and choice, is being able to recognize and name that community care is important. And how are we offering that here? How are we seeing you as a full human being, not just a worker, and having an environment where we can talk about that? Donna Oriolo talks about self-care is, if self-care is about what you do for yourself, community care is what you put into and what you are able to receive from the community you've built, as well as the community you live in. We have a lot of different communities, right? You might have a work community, a family, friends, your local Fort Collins community, Colorado, U.S., the global community. And so it's not, yes, we want to do for others, right? I find most people are pretty good at that. They're pretty good at giving community care. How many of you would say you're pretty good at giving that care to other people when they need it? Yeah, get a lot of head nods. What about receiving it? Okay, some people, yeah. But some people not. It's harder sometimes to receive it. But that community care is also about receiving that community care, letting your community know when you need them. Nikita's work also recognizes that community care is also about people being committed to leveraging their privilege to be there for people and be there for each other in different ways. So again, recognizing our biases, recognizing the discrimination, the inequity we have in our systems, including in our CSU. So like it's everywhere, right? It's embedded in our society. And so recognizing that, and then where are the areas where I might have privilege and power to help support or provide opportunity for my staff. Just a couple more. Okay, so this is not by any means an exhaustive list at all. There are many, many more things that you can do and think about when you are thinking about the policies and the practices in your workplace, particularly if you're a leader or supervisor. And I know just because you're a supervisor does not mean you're at the top of that hierarchy and that you have all the power to do all the things, right? Things like pay equity. You may or may not have a lot of power around that, right? But where do you have some voice? Where do you have some power to offer these trauma-informed practices and policies that are going to help our wellness and serve the whole person? And so not just diversity, equity, inclusion practices, but meaningful ones, right? We're not just saying that we believe and value these things. How do we show that? What are the signs in our organization that show that we actually care about DEIJ? Being able to have flexibility in your work schedules, not having to be micromanaged if you don't need to be, right? Like I know those are perks in my job that I love, that I am not micromanaged, that my supervisor trusts me to do my job and do it well. Policies like having fair compensation, having paid time off and sick time and wellness time, mental health days, right? Like that directly impacts our stress levels and our feelings about our job and our work environment. Having clear and fair job expectations is a big thing. So right up front, very clearly defining these are the expectations, checking in with your staff and supervisees about how things are going, when things change, that we're not adding more work without fair compensation for that work, or at least reducing something else from their plate. Adequate training and supervision. So do we have time for one-on-ones? Do we have time for individual or group team meetings? What are we doing at those meetings to support a collaborative environment, to support a safe environment? And what opportunities are there? Like the Shape the Trainer week, right? That we have opportunities on the job during job hours, paid, to do training, right? And so that's a big piece of it as well. Like pay people for their time. Their time is valuable, and people recognize if you recognize that. Having those multiple feedback mechanisms. I'll say one thing I love that, I don't know if it's up here, but like rituals and routines can be really nice, especially if your team doesn't get to check in as a big group very often. And so we'll do things like at the start of a meeting, we'll just go around and have people do green, yellow, red. So green, I'm feeling great, I'm doing well. Yellow, I'm kind of stressed, not super feeling great. Red, like I'm approaching burnout, I am not okay today. And you don't share why you are, what color you are, or some people will go like magenta, or like I'm a lime green today. People will have fun with it. I'm orange. But being able to recognize, like when our group started doing that, I would come in with a plan of all these things we need to talk about. And one of the times I walk in and almost every single person was in yellow or red. Not a single person was in green. And I cut that agenda in half and was like, I don't even have people probably even really able to be present in this meeting right now. We're going to like slow it down. We're going to kind of, give some support in ways that feel good, right? And so how are you responding to that information? We also would do things like gratitude and glimmers. And share the gratitude. It could be work-related or not. And then the glimmers are like reminders of why we do the work, or just they're the opposite of triggers. So like a glimmer is something that's going to spike you into your resilience zone, make you feel calm. So one of the things I tell people is put glimmers wherever you can. I have my favorite glimmer is my niece, and so I have her on my phone, and then I just see her all the time. It's just something that makes me smile. But is there a smell? Is there a little treat, right? You like, or something that like you can put a quote that's motivating. Put glimmers into your environment when you can, and share glimmers with each other. And one of the last ones, too, I wanted to say, and here's the help now skills. I can send this as a handout as well, Emily, because I know some places like to even put this up in their workplaces. But again, this comes from Trauma Resource Institute. And these are just, they call them help now, reset now. So just in the moment, things when you notice for yourself or maybe a staff or a student that they got spiked out into their high zone or spiked down into their low zone. These are very simple, quick relief, even just a little bit get you down or get you back up into that regulated zone. And so real quick in our last 2 minutes, I want you all to pick one. And again, I know they're simple. When I looked at this list, I was like, that's not going to work. Drinking a glass of water, like counting backward, like that's not going to work. And then you actually start practicing them. They're quick, right? They're not going to just like completely put you in the green for the rest of the day because you were in the red. But they're going to just get you real quick back into the present moment, back into that problem-solving part of the brain where I can reach out for support. I can use a coping skill. So pick one. And so if you got your water, you want to do a drink of water and really slowly drink that water. If you want to look at the colors, name 6 colors in the room. If anyone wants to get up and push your hands against the wall, that's a nice one. Even just mindful walk. So even just as you're walking, like noticing where your heel hits the ground, noticing your toes touch the earth. I do a lot of the times when I am, especially have a dysregulated student or supervisee I'm working with, if it's, confidentiality plays a role, but if it's okay, I typically will hand them a water bottle and say, we're going on a walk. And we'll walk and talk while they drink water to like, especially if you're high zone, and you have someone in the high zone, if you can move that energy out of the body while you're talking, while you're doing some supervision, that can help a lot. So, all right. And lastly, just remember why you started. Trauma-informed care, trauma-informed supervision is a paradigm shift. It is not easy, and we cannot do it alone. And some systems are more ahead than others when it comes to trauma-informed care. So just to remind you that it takes time. It's going to take each and every one of us to commit to trauma-informed care to really push the workplace forward and really value staff and student wellness in the places where we have community. So, take the time to celebrate your wins. Even if you just try one little thing from what you learned today, and put that in place. That's one step closer to having a trauma-informed workplace, having a trauma-informed CSU. So thank you all for your time. This is my info. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions, want to grab coffee, anything. I'm around CSU all the time. So, and then for the survey, if you don't mind, is that correct? Awesome. Thank you.
Chelsea, we just want to say thank you so much. We're going to give you a little gift and appreciation.
Amazing.
I learned a lot, and it is very supportive of a lot of the workshops that we're doing. And so I really appreciate that you gave to what you did, and that there are over 70 of us here So thank you very much.
Cool, thank you very
Give it up one more time.